Mr. Speaker, it's an honor to have the opportunity today to celebrate the growth and contributions of the many businesses in my riding, particularly the Canada North Technology Park, and particularly throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. The Canada North Technology Park is home to over 540 companies and contributes over $13 billion to Canada's GDP annually. The innovation, the technology, and the hardware from these companies has been the backbone of our country's telecommunications systems. 2 weeks ago, the Canada North Business Association opened their doors to a new community space called Hub 350. With incredible partners like Carleton University, the University of Ottawa, as well as industry such as TELUS, BlackBerry QNX, and Wesley Clover, the future is bright. I want to thank the Canada North Business Association for their leadership and commitment in bringing industry and academia together and launching Hub 350 and the 5G Innovation Zone. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Parry Sound, Muskoka.
Mr. Speaker, it is an honour to rise in this place and thank my neighbours in Parry Sound, Muskoka for once again trusting me to be their voice in this chamber. Earlier this month, I was pleased to attend the Friends of the Muskoka Watershed Ash Drive in Bracebridge. Created by Dr. Norman Yan, the Muskoka Ash Project seeks to fight the problem of ecological osteoporosis of the trees in Muskoka. Using ash recovered from residential wood stoves, it's then used to replenish calcium levels in the soil and water. Mr. Speaker, this is but one example of everyday Canadians of all partisan stripes coming together to tackle a problem. As we begin this 44th Parliament, I call on all my colleagues on all sides of the House to use this same approach. Canadians are tired of the partisan gridlock, they're tired of the bickering back and forth, they're tired of the rhetoric. Each of us, Mr. Speaker, was sent here to this House to solve problems that Canadians are facing. I challenge each of us to reach across the aisle, find common ground, take up the people's work of ensuring that Canada's best days always lie ahead.
The honourable member for Brampton East.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize and commemorate a great man, the Honourable Manmeet Singh Bhullar. His life was taken too soon in 2015 after stopping on the highway to help a motorist in distress. Mr. Bhullar was committed to helping those most in need, not only here in Canada, but around the world. Through his efforts and collaboration between the Government of Canada and the Manmeet Singh Bhullar Foundation, a great deal of Afghanistan Sikh and Hindu minorities are now here in Canada and thriving. These families and children are in school, working and giving back to our communities. Most importantly, because of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedom, they are able to freely practice their religion. They are living the Canadian dream. His legacy will live on as his work continues through the Foundation in partnership with the Government of Canada. Mita, as many of us call him, inspired so many of us in this chamber. His passion, drive, and energy was contagious, and he touched many lives while he was with us. Thank you for inspiring us, my friend. You will be forever missed.
L'honorable député de Salaberry-sur-Roi.
Monsieur le Président, lorsque je vous dis que je suis fière d'être député de Salaberry-sur-Roi, c'est parce que j'ai toutes les raisons de l'être. J'ai l'honneur de côtoyer des gens d'exception, dont le plus récent coup de cœur des agricultrices du Québec. Pionnière, déterminée, innovante, voilà ce qui décrit Nathalie Lacroix, copropriétaire de l'entreprise Petit Fruit Saint-Louis à Saint-Louis-de-Gonzague. Madame Lacroix s'est lancée en 2011 dans la production d'un fruit encore méconnu, la camerise biologique. Aujourd'hui, ce sont des milliers d'adeptes qui font le plein de ce petit fruit directement dans le champ des Lacroix-Légers ou qui achètent toutes sortes de leurs délicieuses créations. Madame Lacroix est une femme vraiment admirable qui sait partager avec sa famille et sa communauté ses talents et ses passions. Chère Nathalie, tu es une femme de terre, une femme de cœur, tu es une digne représentante des agricultrices du Québec. Mon ami, on se voit bientôt à la boutique. J'ai encore des cadeaux de Noël à acheter.
L'honorable député de Bourassa.
Monsieur le Président, à l'aube de cette 44e législature, je désire remercier chaleureusement les citoyens du comté de Bourassa qui m'ont fait confiance pour la 4e élection consécutive. Quel privilège! Je suis très fier de les représenter. J'en profite pour remercier aussi mes employés pour la qualité des services dispensés. Je remercie aussi ma famille pour leur soutien indéfectible, ainsi que les nombreux bénévoles qui ont participé à mes campagnes. Depuis 2015, la qualité de vie des citoyens est nettement améliorée, mais il en reste beaucoup à faire. Ensemble, nous devons continuer à combattre l'insécurité, développer plus de logements abordables, accompagner les aînés et surtout construire un centre sportif. Soyez assurés, je serai toujours à vos côtés, at your side, à seu lado, al vostro fianco, a namahatkom, a veomapmashi.
The Honourable Member for Niagara West.
Today I rise to thank the constituents of Niagara West for putting their trust in me for the 7th consecutive time. I'm proud and honoured to be their voice in this chamber once again. I'm humbled that I received more votes in this election than the last one. Thank you, Niagara West. Thank you for your support. As we all know, this election was extremely divisive, and this was only so because of the Prime Minister. Our Prime Minister leading a corrupt and secretive government. Canadians should be concerned that our Prime Minister would try and divide us, for pitting one group of Canadians against another. That is no way to lead this country. No. The Prime Minister is also failing Canadians on the economy. Just look at the skyrocketing inflation and the cost of living crisis we are in. Higher prices for groceries, gas, and other essentials like home heating. My constituents are worried. Canadians are worried. Thankfully, they can count on a strong and united Conservative official opposition to fight for the best interests of all Canadians, and we intend to do exactly that.
The Honourable Member for London West.
Mr. Speaker, today I rise in the House for the first time to talk about an issue that is personal to me. Ma famille et moi sommes arrivés au Canada en tant que réfugiés.
My family and myself came to Canada as refugees.
The first years of my life in Canada, I lived in social housing, and considering the rate of homelessness across the country, I know that we were lucky. Accessible and affordable housing is not a privilege, it should be a universal right. Mr. Speaker, every single person in London across Canada deserves a place to call home. That's why I want to highlight Homes Unlimited, an organization working tirelessly since 1972, helping to fill the housing gap for Londoners with affordable housing solutions. The Tecumseh Place development, part of the Homes Unlimited, has worked to provide affordable housing for the families of London West. I also want to highlight the need of housing across the country and thank our government for making it a priority in this mandate. I hope that across the aisle we can agree to make this a nonpartisan and an important issue we can champion in our time here. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable député d'Orléans.
Mr. Speaker, Orleans is filled with outstanding residents, and 2 of Orleans residents received the 2021 Order of Ottawa Awards on last Thursday, November 18. Congratulations to Michael Allen, President and CEO of United Way East Ontario, and Ian Ferris, Senior Vice President of the Chamber Network Relation and Advocacy at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce for this well-deserved recognitions. La semaine dernière, j'ai aussi le privilège d'assister à la soirée des prix Saphir 2021 à Toronto,
participating in
organisée par la
2021
Fondation Franco-Ontarienne.
ceremony in Toronto, organized by the Franco-Ontarian Association. Members across the country were recognized for their leadership and commitment. I'd like to give a special bravo to Jocelyne Legault for her work as the Director General of the Gymnastics Club in Orleans. Congratulations.
Thank you to the Orleans community for re-electing me and allowing me to be in this 44th Parliament. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
The Honourable Member for Kenora.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and my congratulations to you on your re-election. As this is my first opportunity to rise in the 44th Parliament, I want to thank the people of the Kenora riding for once again placing their trust in me to serve in this chamber. It is an honor to continue in this position, and I am thankful to everyone who helped our team make it possible. During the last campaign, Speaker, I heard from countless individuals hoping for a robust economic recovery that includes the North. To make that happen, small businesses must be given the opportunity to thrive, Serious labour shortages must be addressed, and the government must present a real plan to deal with the current housing crisis. Canada's recovery must include all sectors and all regions. Mr. Speaker, it is my renewed pledge that I will work to ensure that Kenora riding and all of Northern Ontario is well positioned to drive that economic recovery forward. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Etobicoke Centre. Mr. Speaker, I rise to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the famine genocide in Ukraine known as the Holodomor, when Joseph Stalin closed Ukraine's borders and confiscated all food to destroy a Ukrainian population opposed to his rule. 19 people per minute, 1,200 per hour, and 28,000 per day were dying of famine at the height of the Holodomor. The world was silent. Millions died as a result. My grandmother Olena was a survivor of the Holodomor, and she once told me that she hoped that the victims of the Holodomor would not only be remembered, but that they would be honored. Honoring them for her meant not just remembering them or commemorating them, but making sure that crimes like this never happens again. So I hope that this week we all take the time to remember and commemorate the victims, but also renew our efforts, redouble our efforts to ensuring that crimes like this that are happening even today stop and never happen again. Let us do as my grandmother would have asked if she were here today. Let us remember the victims. Let us commemorate the victims. Let us honor them. The Honourable Member for Central Okanagan, Similkameen Nicola.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to take a moment to thank so many members of this place and their constituents who've reached out and passed on support to the good people of Princeton and Merritt, along with the many small Indigenous communities in the Similkameen and Nicola valleys who've been devastated by flooding. While there's been some positive news that some residents can return home, in reality, still many challenges remain. It's one thing to clean up your home and remove destroyed belongings, but those belongings pile up on streets and they need to be removed. Sewer systems are not working. There is no water. And in many places, there's no gas or electricity and thus no heat. Now, each night, the temperature drops further below zero and does not move much above zero in the day. All of these residents are in a race against time now to rebuild their lives in as much as possible before the true freeze of winter sets in. I would like to ask all members of this House to continue to think and advocate for the people of Merritt, Princeton, and those other small communities who need every bit of support and every bit of encouragement we can muster right now and in the future. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Mission Metzke Fraser Canyon.
Mr. Speaker, on June 29th, my riding suffered one of the worst disasters in recent memory. Lytton burned to the ground. Now, floods and mudslides destroyed critical infrastructure and private property in every corner of my riding in the last few weeks. My constituents in Mission Metzke Fraser Canyon are hurting. BC is hurting. We are resilient, we will get through this, but we do need help. The government speaks a lot about addressing climate change. Here is the opportunity to back those words with action through resilient infrastructure, climate change adaptation and mitigation for the 21st century. I call on the government to work with partners to rebuild Lytton, to fund critical infrastructure, and to empower First Nations to have more control over disaster management, because the current way of doing things is failing. We have much to do, and I'm squarely focused on getting the resources British Columbia needs to build back. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Port Moody Coquitlam.
I wish to thank the good people of Port Moody Coquitlam for electing me as one of the 103 women in this House. Mr. Speaker, this pandemic has been hard on women, and the increased burden of unpaid work caused too many to leave the workforce to take on childcare and homeschooling. Their careers have been set back as they stepped forward for their families. And the women working the front lines of the care economy, many who are racialized and new immigrants, have faced long hours and increased incidents of abuse. They have been hailed as heroes but paid inadequate wages. That is wrong. Yes. Their work is invaluable. This devaluation exists because of broader systems of oppression. As we recover from this pandemic, we must take the opportunity to remove barriers for women and diverse genders and finally achieve gender equality.
L'honorable député de Saint-Jean.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to speak about the Banner Project, an initiative set up a few years ago by Richelieu at the 79th branch of the Legion. Every year during the Remembrance Day period, banners bearing the effigies of veterans from my region adorn the main streets of Saint-Jean. They remind us of the service of our soldiers, whose biographies can be found on the city's website. If I mention this, Mr. Speaker, it is because Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu was the first city in Quebec to set up such an initiative. Other municipalities have since followed suit, and we hope that the project will become a model for even more cities. Mr. Speaker, it is said that military personnel always pay for their service with their lives, while some do it in one fell swoop, others pay for it over a lifetime. Initiatives like the Banner Project are our way of saying a well-deserved thank you.
The Honourable Member for Abbotsford.
This past week, Canadians watched in horror as disaster struck British Columbia. Torrential rains unleashed a flood that washed out highways, bridges, water and sewer systems. Thousands of homes and businesses have been submerged. Farm animals have drowned or been euthanized. The scene in Abbotsford is one of unimaginable destruction. Countless families have been displaced. Dikes have been breached, pump stations overwhelmed, and untold property lost as the carnage swept across our city. And yet I'm grateful to live in Abbotsford. In the middle of all this chaos, my community stepped up when it counted. Our mayor, volunteers, first responders, armed forces, and so many others tirelessly worked to get people to safety and protect the public against harm. The damage will take years to assess and is in the billions of dollars. But we will overcome this monumental challenge and rebuild an even more resilient community. So, Mr. Speaker, may God bless Abbotsford and may God bless Canada.
The Honourable Member for Avalon.
Mr. Speaker, it's with a heavy heart that I rise today to speak to you and members of this House about two young men missing at sea off the coast of Newfoundland. Adolfo, better known as Tommy Ferreira, and Michael Gill left Lawrence Harbour to Hunter on Saturday, November 13th, and sadly, despite best efforts of rescue crews, have yet not returned home. To the members of the Canadian Coast Guard, the RCMP, the Coast Guard Auxiliary, boat owners and fish harvesters that have and continue to aid in the search for these two men, we say thank you for doing what most of us can only imagine as being a heart-wrenching job. And it is incumbent on us as a government to ensure those who go to sea are safe and will return home to their families each night. We must continue to change our rules and policies to ensure the safety of every person out on our waters. I want to extend to the families and friends of these two young boys thoughts and prayers from the constituents in Avalon and indeed all Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. May God be with them.
Oral questions. Question orale. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, it's nice to see you in the chair and it's great to see MPs in their seats. For more than a week, Canadians have been watching devastating images out of British Columbia as floods ravage Abbotsford, Hope, and dozens of communities. I want to recognize that the Minister has been in regular contact with the federal government's response to these tragic floods. So could the Prime Minister please update this House on the latest federal government efforts to deal with this disaster?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
I thank the member opposite for bringing this up. I know that he and I and all members of this House, indeed all Canadians, stand with British Columbians during this extraordinarily difficult time. We are, as he said, in close contact with provincial authorities to make sure we're prepared for any further aid required. Federal resources have been on the ground since the very beginning and now have up to 500 CAF members on their ground, sandbagging, rescuing livestock, providing food and support to remote communities. We will continue to be there to support people in BC as we get through this and as we rebuild. It's what Canadians do. We stick up for each other. We're there for each other. We will continue.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
I'd like to thank the Prime Minister and keep on the theme of standing up for people in British Columbia. The Coastal GasLink project has agreements with 20 Indigenous communities in BC. True reconciliation demands a plan for economic reconciliation so that the next generation of Indigenous children inherit opportunity and not trauma, Mr. Speaker. This week, we've seen dog whistle invitations to blow up projects like Coastal GasLink. So why are Canadians waiting on this Prime Minister to release a real plan for economic reconciliation?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, from 2015 onwards, we have been serious about the work of reconciliation, which absolutely does include economic reconciliation in leadership, in partnership with Indigenous peoples, whether it's on developing natural resources, whether it's on ensuring parity in investments in schools, or ending long-term boil water advisories. We will continue to move forward in a way that is led by and guided by the partnerships with Indigenous peoples across this country. Of course, Canadians need to work together to achieve this goal, and any remarks that advocate for or serve to instigate violence are unproductive and potentially dangerous.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, Canadian inflation is at a 20-year high. 60% of Canadian parents are worried about putting food on the table. Monthly grocery bills have already gone up hundreds of dollars. The speech from the throne mentioned inflation once.
Shameful.
Just once, Mr. Speaker. So is the Prime Minister having trouble understanding the concerns of Canadian families, or does he just not care?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, inflation is a challenge that countries around the world are facing right now because of disrupted supply chains, because of the recovery of our economies after COVID. But we are extremely concerned about the rising costs of living brought to people by inflation. The member opposite talked about families. That's exactly why we're moving forward with $10 a day childcare right across the country. And indeed, even in places like Alberta, they're moving forward on that and indeed have shown that they will cut in half childcare costs for families as of January 1st. That's real help that the Conservatives here in this House have stood against.
Before I go to the Leader of the Opposition, I'm sure everybody wants to hear the responses to the questions. I just want to point that out and make sure that everybody stays quiet and listens. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Monsieur le Président, l'inflation au Canada est à son plus haut niveau. 60% des familles canadiennes ont peur de ne pas être capables de nourrir leur famille. Les factures d'épicerie ont déjà augmenté des centaines de dollars. Mais le discours de Trump a seulement mentionné l'inflation une seule fois. Une fois. Le Premier ministre sait-il que nous avons une crise d'inflation au Canada?
Le très honorable Premier ministre.
Je trouve ça intéressant que, oui, on parle du défi de l'inflation auquel bien des pays à travers le monde sont adressés, mais on a passé beaucoup plus de temps dans le discours du trône à parler de nos solutions, des solutions comme les garderies à $10 par jour à travers le pays et des investissements dans la crise du logement, des investissements et des initiatives que les conservateurs au fédéral sont contre. Ils ont promis de déchirer les ententes pour qui allaient aider les familles pour les garderies. Nous, on va avancer pour aider les familles justement avec le coût de la vie.
L'honorable chef de l'opposition.
Solution pour l'économie, Monsieur le Président, la pénurie de main-d'œuvre est réelle, mais les libéraux l'ignorent. Le Québec est placardé de pancartes, nous embauchons. Mais le Premier ministre n'a pas de plan pour régler cette situation. Pas de solution, Monsieur le Président. La preuve, la pénurie de main-d'œuvre n'a même pas été mentionnée une seule fois dans le discours de Trump. Comment le Premier ministre peut-il expliquer aux entrepreneurs et PME qu'il ne reconnaît pas le problème de la pénurie de main-d'œuvre au Canada?
Monsieur le Président, notre discours du trône se concentrait sur auxquels font face les Canadiens, incluant la pénurie de main-d'œuvre. Parce que nous savons que d'en finir avec la COVID, de rebâtir une économie forte et inclusive pour tout le monde, d'avancer dans la lutte contre les changements climatiques en créant de nouveaux emplois innovants dans les secteurs verts et aussi la réconciliation, c'est les grandes priorités sur lesquelles les Canadiens veulent qu'on travaille et c'est exactement ce que nous allons faire. Oui, nous allons rehausser nos niveaux d'immigration. Oui, nous allons investir dans la formation. Oui, nous allons aider à contrer cette pénurie de la main-d'œuvre qui existait avant la pandémie, qui dure encore maintenant.
L'honorable député de Belleuil-Chambly.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Nous sommes au début d'une nouvelle législature qui nous donnerait certainement l'occasion de collaborer parfois pour le bien des gens. Ça pourra vouloir dire brasser un petit peu. Alors, au besoin, on le fera. La priorité des Canadiens, la priorité des Québécoises et des Québécois, c'est bien sûr la santé. Et ça prend la forme dans la perspective des provinces et du Québec, du financement des soins de santé, de l'augmentation des transferts en santé. Le Bloc québécois a formulé une proposition à l'effet de remplacer les traditionnelles et opaques rencontres des premiers ministres par un sommet public sur la santé, un sommet sur le financement des soins de santé auquel tous les premiers ministres participeraient, le premier ministre ouvertement, publiquement, avec les ministres de la Santé pour que tant les médias que la population comprennent les enjeux et les propositions. Est-ce que le premier ministre a considéré la proposition du Bloc québécois?
Le très honorable premier ministre.
Nous reconnaissons tous que notre système de santé et nos travailleurs de la santé ont aidé les Canadiens à traverser cette pandémie. Nous avons donc un plan pour éliminer les retards dans les systèmes de soins de santé, pour construire de meilleurs établissements de santé mentale et de soins de longue durée et d'embaucher jusqu'à 7500 médecins et infirmières supplémentaires, tout en partenariat avec les provinces. Nous avons veillé à ce que ces systèmes de soins de santé des provinces et des territoires puissent fournir des soins grâce au supplément de 4 milliards de dollars dans le budget 2021. Nous allons continuer d'être là pour investir dans le système de santé, pour respecter les compétences et s'assurer les meilleurs soins de santé pour tous les Canadiens à travers le pays.
Le député de Belleuil-Chambly.
Monsieur le Président, vous me permettrez de m'inquiéter du mot partenariat qui a l'air de vouloir dire condition. Et permettez-moi, en souvenir de la campagne, de m'inquiéter du mot plan, qui fut fort inquiétant aussi. Cependant, est-ce que le premier ministre peut nous dire, avec tout le sérieux du monde, s'il considère que les drames épouvantables vécus dans le cadre de la pandémie sont de la faute et la responsabilité des provinces et du Québec, et s'il croit et a la prétention que si ça avait été lui, il aurait fait mieux.
Le très honorable premier ministre.
Monsieur le Président, je ne suis pas du tout intéressé à pointer du doigt les responsabilités des drames abominables que les gens ont vécus à travers le pays. Nous sommes tous très au courant que nous avons besoin de travailler ensemble pour s'assurer que nos aînés partout au pays aient des meilleurs soutiens. Et c'est exactement ça pourquoi on est là pour travailler avec les provinces et territoires. Les aînés, les individus, ils veulent juste que leurs parents, leurs grands-parents soient bien pris en soin de la bonne façon. Nous allons être là pour être partenaires, pour investir, pour s'assurer que les aînés à travers le pays soient en sécurité.
L'honorable député de Burnaby-Sud.
Mr. Speaker, we are in a climate crisis, and we need to act urgently. This climate crisis also presents an opportunity to create good jobs for workers, but not if we don't have a plan. this throne speech completely misses the opportunity to have a plan for workers. So why did this Prime Minister abandon workers without a plan to create good-paying jobs that help us fight the climate crisis? Why is there no plan for workers in this throne speech to fight the climate crisis?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, just a few months ago, all parties had an opportunity to put forward their plans to fight climate change and to grow the Canadian economy. And I was extremely pleased to see that the support for the Liberal plan on growing the economy, on fighting climate change, was recognized by top scientists, by top environmental leaders like BC's Andrew Weaver, by economists like Mark Jacquard. The kinds of investments and plan that we've put forward and that we've continued to build on in the throne speech was recognized as the strongest plan for the economy and to fight climate change by all experts.
The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
On est dans une crise climatique
We're
et on
in
doit
a climate
agir
crisis, and
immédiatement.
we have to
Une chose qu'on
act
peut faire, c'est
immediately.
d'éliminer les
One thing
subventions
that could
aux
be done is
pétrolières.
to
Le gouvernement a promis de le faire,
subsidies
mais
to
à
the
ce
oil
moment,
patch, and the Prime
ils
Minister promised to do that, but
14
currently
fois
they're
de
investing
plus dans
14
l'énergie
times
fossile
more
que dans
in
l'énergie
fossil fuels
renouvelable.
than in
Le
renewable
Premier ministre
fuels.
s'engage-t-il
Will the
à
Prime Minister
éliminer
undertake to
complètement les
completely
subventions aux
eliminate
pétrolières
subsidies
pour investir
to oil
l'argent dans
companies
l'énergie
and
renouvelable
invest
pour
that
faire
money in
face à
renewable
la crise
energy
climatique?
to deal with the climate crisis?
Honorable Premier Ministre.
Monsieur le Président, en tant que gouvernement,
Mr.
ça
Speaker,
fait
as
bien
a
des années
government,
qu'on s'est engagé
for
à
a number of
éliminer
years now,
les subventions
we've
à
made a
l'industrie
commitment
pétrolière et on
to
va le faire même
end
avant
subsidies
la
to
date ciblée de
fossil fuels, and we'll do
2025 parce
that
qu'on sait
before
que
the
c'est
target date of
important. En
2025
plus,
because we
on
know
a
it's
mis de l'avant
important. In
un plan
addition,
pour
we've
mettre
gone
une
ahead with a
limite
plan
absolue
to
sur
put
les
a
émissions
strict
de
limit on
l'industrie gazière et
emissions coming
pétrolière et de
from
réduire les
oil and
émissions
gas and to
progressivement
reduce
jusqu'à ce qu'on
emissions
atteigne le
gradually
net zéro
until
en
we
2050
hit net zero
en
in
suivant les
2050.
conseils des scientifiques.
Following the
C'était le
advice
plan
of
que le Parti
scientists.
libéral a mis
That's
de
the
l'avant,
plan
qui
the
était
Liberal
malheureusement
Party came up
pour le
with,
NPD
and
beaucoup plus
unfortunately for
fort
the
que le
NDP,
plan
it was
qu'eux,
far
ils avaient
stronger
proposé
than
dans
their
cette
own
dernière élection.
plan that they proposed in the
Member
last
for
election.
Portage Lisker.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday's speech was just more Liberal broken promises, but what it didn't talk about was the rising cost of everything in this country. Gasoline, groceries, rent, clothing, everything that Canadians need for their basic needs are going through the roof. So my question for the Prime Minister is simple. When is the last time he's gone and filled up his tank of gas with gas? When has he gone to a grocery store? When has he gone to a hardware store? Does he know what a loaf of bread costs now, or maybe a can of beans, or a package of bacon? Thank you.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, in the conversations I've had with Canadians over the past number of months, two things kept coming back as their greatest concerns. One was the rising costs of childcare and how much it costs their family. Two was their concerns about the housing crisis we're living. Well, Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives who pretend to know what Canadians are going through promised to cut our plan on childcare, to scrap it entirely when families need the thousands of dollars that our deal for $10 a day would bring them. And their plan on housing was to give tax breaks to wealthy landlords so they could sell their homes. That doesn't make sense, Mr. Speaker.
I'm trying to hear the questions and the responses and answers. I just want to make sure that everybody wants to hear them as well. Good. Okay, good. We're good to proceed. The Honourable Member for Portage Lisker.
Well, let me answer that question for the Prime Minister. A year ago, a pack of bacon was about $5. Today, if you go and buy even no-name brand, everybody knows what no-name brand is except maybe the Prime Minister, it's almost $8. Mr. Speaker, people without children, seniors, those who have school-aged children are buying bacon, bread, eggs, clothing, rent, and this is costing them. But it's very disappointing to have a Prime Minister who's so out of touch. The only thing he might be worried about is if the cost of surfboards go up. I guess he'll worry about that. Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister acknowledge that there is a crisis going on with inflation in this country?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Once again, Mr. Speaker, while Conservatives try to score cheap political points, we are focused on Canadians we will continue to work hand in hand with provinces, including conservative provinces like Alberta, that realize that moving forward on $10 a day childcare, and indeed cutting childcare costs in half for families as soon as this coming January, will make a huge difference in affordability for families. On top of that, we are moving forward to make even more investments in countering the housing crisis, because we know those are two big issues that Canadians are struggling, but there are more. We will continue to work with them on it.
The Honourable Member for Portage Lisker.
Well, I see the other thing that's inflating is the Prime Minister's arrogance and disconnect. It's very disappointing to see. The Prime Minister said he doesn't care about monetary policy. Well, that's clear, because it's his monetary policy that is causing massive inflation in Canada. And he might try to say, well, it's happening everywhere, but it's worse in Canada. And people without children, or people with school-age children, seniors, there are Canadians who are struggling with it. So when will the Prime Minister stop just talking about daycare and talk about the fact that everything in this country is going up, and he doesn't seem to realize it or wants to address it?
Hear, hear. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, we see once again the conservative ideology of this federal party slip through as they talk disparagingly about things like, oh, stop talking about childcare, start talking about things that matter to people. I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, but the investments that Canadians need, and indeed that conservative premiers as well across the country recognize, is supporting families is not just good for moms, not just good for kids, it's good for the entire economy as we see greater workplace participation. That, unfortunately, is what Conservatives, yet again, do not get because of their ideology.
L'honorable député de Louis-Saint-Laurent.
Monsieur le Président, voici la réalité des faits. Aujourd'hui, 200 000 emplois au Québec ne sont pas occupés à cause de la pénurie de main-d'œuvre. Ça a coûté 18 milliards à nos entreprises, le fait qu'il n'y ait pas accès à un emploi, qu'il n'y a pas assez d'employés. 70% de nos entreprises refusent des contrats. C'est ça, Monsieur le Président, la réalité économique du Canada, pénurie de main-d'œuvre. Et hier, dans le discours du trône, rien là-dessus. Pourquoi le Premier ministre fait semblant qu'il ne se passe rien, alors que nos entreprises souffrent actuellement par le manque de main-d'œuvre?
Le très honorable Premier ministre. Je comprends que le Parti conservateur est très axé sur les problèmes sans proposer de solutions. Nous, dans le discours du trône, on a plus parlé des solutions, Monsieur le Président. Comme le fait, par exemple, que depuis un an, on avait nos frontières fermées à cause de la pandémie, et maintenant, on va investir encore plus en immigration, en travaillant avec les provinces, en travaillant pour amener plus de main-d'œuvre au pays, en même temps qu'on investit dans les opportunités comme la petite enfance pour s'assurer que dans les décennies à venir, on ait un marché du travail robuste où il n'y a pas de pénurie de main-d'œuvre.
Le député de Louis-Saint-Laurent.
Permettez-moi d'être suspect quand le Premier ministre parle de la frontière, parce que s'il y en a un qui a très mal géré la frontière, c'est bien l'actuel Premier ministre du Canada. Dans ma circonscription, Monsieur le Président, j'ai le bureau chef de famille des prix. Et ce matin, j'ai parlé au patron et c'est 212 emplois disponibles actuellement, manque de main-d'œuvre. Dans Bellechasse, avec ma nouvelle collègue dans Excel-Dor, ils ont 50 emplois disponibles, pénurie de main-d'œuvre. Et hier, rien du tout dans le discours du trône. Qu'est-ce que le Premier ministre a dit aux entrepreneurs qui, eux, font face à la réalité des faits, pénurie de main-d'œuvre?
Très honorable Premier ministre.
Monsieur le Président, on sait très bien qu'il y a des énormes défis au niveau de la pénurie de main-d'œuvre à travers le pays. C'est pour ça que nous sommes en train de travailler justement avec les provinces, avec les entrepreneurs sur des solutions, que ce soit au niveau de l'immigration, que ce soit au niveau de la formation de main-d'œuvre, que ce soit dans les investissements en éducation et en petite enfance. Nous allons créer un système et nous allons s'assurer d'avoir plus d'opportunités pour les entrepreneurs. La réalité, c'est que les conservateurs se plaignaient que c'était l'aide aux travailleurs qui bloquait et créait cette pénurie. Or, on est maintenant beaucoup plus ciblé dans notre aide et on voit que la pénurie continue sur laquelle on va travailler.
L'honorable député de Louis-Saint-Laurent.
Monsieur le Président, autre réalité économique que toutes les familles canadiennes constatent, c'est le coût de la vie qui augmente. On est à un taux d'inflation de 4,7 %. C'est la pire situation depuis 2003. Et hier, dans le discours du trône, une seule mention de la part du premier ministre par rapport au gouverneur général, dans un français discutable, où est la pensez-vous le mot inflation? Monsieur le Président, la réalité, c'est que le premier ministre a déjà dit que lui, un budget, ça s'équilibre par lui-même. Est-ce que selon lui, le taux d'inflation va baisser par lui-même?
Le très honorable Premier ministre.
Monsieur le Président, l'inflation est une réalité qui touche les pays à travers le monde maintenant et le Canada fait mieux que beaucoup de nos pays pairs, incluant les États-Unis. Mais oui, c'est un grand défi pour les citoyens. C'est pour ça qu'on s'est attardé hier dans le discours du trône sur pas juste le problème, mais les solutions aussi. On sait que des investissements dans le logement abordable et l'abordabilité des logements, des investissements dans les centres de petite enfance pour les enfants, y compris de devoir créer 37 000 nouvelles places au Québec, c'est des choses qui vont aider les familles à gérer le coût de la vie. On en a plus à faire et on va toujours être là, Monsieur le Président, avec des solutions pour les familles.
Le député de Belleuil-Chambly.
Merci. Monsieur le Président, le Premier ministre et le ministre de l'Environnement se sont présentés à la COP26 avec de fort intéressantes intentions que je salue au demeurant. Toutefois, c'était la COP de la dernière chance, disait-on, et il y a des enjeux relatifs au gaz et au pétrole qui persistent. Alors que le gouvernement prétend avoir des objectifs ambitieux en matière de réduction des émissions de gaz à effet de serre, l'industrie pétrolière, elle, au contraire, se vante d'un désir ou d'une projection d'augmentation des forages de 25 % en 2022. Est-ce que c'est compatible avec les objectifs du gouvernement?
Très honorable Premier ministre.
Président, dans le plan que nous avions présenté à la COP26, dans le plan que nous avons présenté aux Canadiens lors des dernières élections, on reconnaît qu'on a besoin de mettre un cap absolu sur les émissions de l'industrie pétrolière et gazière et de les réduire jusqu'à la carboneutralité. C'est d'ailleurs des engagements qui ont déjà été pris par un grand nombre de grandes compagnies pétrolières au Canada. Nous allons nous baser sur la science, nous allons réduire nos émissions à travers le pays, nous allons nous assurer de créer les bons emplois vers un avenir meilleur pour tous en luttant contre les changements climatiques en même temps.
Le député de Belleuil-Chambly.
En matière de science, les anciennes lectures du nouveau ministre étaient plus instructives que les nouvelles, de toute évidence. Cependant, le premier ministre est aux prises avec un Canada de l'Ouest qui est éminemment pétrolier et un Québec qui est beaucoup plus vert. Or, un calcul simple établit que de réduire les émissions de gaz à effet de serre par baril est au contraire une autorisation pour augmenter la production, ce qui, à terme, ne change rien. Est-ce que le premier ministre ne se demande pas si sa solution n'est pas la recette de l'échec?
Le très honorable Premier ministre.
Dans tout le respect que je dois à mon honorable collègue du Bloc québécois, je veux lui expliquer qu'au Canada, dans une fédération, on a quelque chose qui s'appelle des champs de compétences des provinces.
On va arrêter le... Je peux pas entendre la réponse, alors je demande à tout le monde de peut-être pas crier dans la Chambre. L'honorable Premier ministre.
Alors, l'honorable député devrait très bien savoir que le gouvernement fédéral peut légiférer et régler les émissions, mais ne peut pas directement s'attaquer ou contrôler la production qui est dans un champ de compétences des provinces, quelque chose que lui devrait très bien savoir.
The honourable member for Carleton.
The cost of government is driving up the cost of living. Almost $500 billion of inflationist liberal deficits mean more dollars chasing fewer goods, driving higher prices. But the Prime Minister says he doesn't think much about monetary policy. That's no surprise. After all, it's just inflation. Given that housing and gas prices are up by a third, has he had time since he got off the surfboard to think a little bit more about monetary policy?
I just want to remind the honourable members, I know we've been gone for a while and we're back, but when we're talking in the House, we can't mention someone's name in the House. We refer to them as their title or by their writing. I just wanted to make that clear in case all of you forgot. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, while the Conservatives play silly partisan games, we are focused on Canadians. We know that what Canadians are facing is a serious situation, and that is why we have taken real action. First of all, in disagreement with the Conservatives, we invested to support Canadians through the pandemic. It wasn't just the right solution for the health crisis, it was also the right solution to make sure our economy would come roaring back. That's why we're moving forward on investments like childcare and housing to make sure that we're helping Canadians through this affordability challenge as well.
Hear, hear.
The honourable member for Carleton.
Well, every time he creates a new program, the cost of the said object goes up. For example, he spent $70 billion on affordable housing to make housing prices go up by almost $300,000. And many members of this House were not even born when Liberals first started promising to make daycare affordable. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, when will he realize that more dollars chasing fewer goods means higher prices, and that the more he spends, the higher the cost?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the member for Carleton and indeed the Conservative approach on the economy is well known by Canadians, and that's why it was so...
I just want to make sure we're okay to continue. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, they were soundly rejected 3 times in a row by Canadians. Our focus has been on growing the middle class and supporting hard-working Canadians throughout. That's exactly what we've been doing. When we put forward a plan for $10 a day childcare that's been accepted by a number of Conservative premiers across the country, the federal Conservatives promised to rip it up. As we choose to move forward on investing in housing, they want to give tax breaks to landlords to sell their buildings. That was the wrong approach, Mr. Speaker. This is the right one.
The honourable member for Carleton.
He likes to blame his inflation on something that's happening in a faraway place around the world. Why is it then that Canadian consumers are paying higher rates of inflation than Saudi Arabia, Switzerland, Singapore, India, China, Japan, Germany, Italy, France, the UK, the Eurozone? In fact, every country except the money-printing mammoth south of the border has lower inflation than us. Why doesn't he take responsibility for the higher cost of living that his out-of-control spending is piling on the backs of Canadians?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
I am impressed to see the high esteem in which the member from Carleton seems to hold me, that I was able to create a global inflation crisis with our initiatives to support Canadians through this pandemic, because that's exactly what he is saying. Everywhere in the world, they are seeing record high inflation, and here in Canada, we continue to invest in ways to support them with world-class childcare investments, with housing, with investments in reconciliation, in fighting climate change, in building a better future, while they choose to hide their heads in the sand.
Honourable member for Carleton.
Je pense que le Premier ministre a manqué les faits. En fait, les autres pays ont moins d'inflation qu'ici au Canada. La France, l'Italie, l'Allemagne, le Japon, le Royaume-Uni ont tous des taux d'inflation beaucoup plus bas qu'ici au Canada. Seulement les États-Unis, qui impriment de l'argent comme les fous, à un taux d'inflation plus élevé, et lui, il veut répliquer ça. On sait que ce Premier ministre ne pense pas aux politiques monétaires. Après tout, c'est juste inflation. Mais peut-il commencer à penser aux vrais coûts qu'ils mettent sur les épaules des Canadiens?
Is he thinking about the real costs he's putting on Canadian shoulders?
Encore une fois, je veux rappeler aux députés, peut-être qu'il ne m'a pas compris quand je l'ai dit en anglais, je vais le dire en français. Quand on est dans la Chambre, on réfère aux autres députés par leur nom de comté ou par leur titre. Je pense que c'est clair maintenant, c'est dans les deux langues, c'est là. Le très honorable Premier ministre.
Je pense que je vais reprendre une expression que j'avais en termes d'enseignant. Si le député de Carleton passait plus de temps à faire ses devoirs et moins de temps à créer des jeux de mots, il comprendrait peut-être que le monde entier est en train de faire face à une crise d'inflation qui, oui, est grave dans tous les pays, plus grave aux États-Unis que chez nous. Mais c'est pour ça que nous mettons de l'avant des solutions concrètes, comme des investissements en petite enfance et en création d'espaces en garderie, comme l'investissement dans le logement. Nous allons continuer d'être là pour les Canadiens pendant que les conservateurs se concentrent sur moi.
Member for Burnaby South.
We are in a housing crisis where people cannot find a home to call their own. It is impossible for people to find a home. They're seeing the forces of speculation driving up the cost of housing, and this federal government and previous governments haven't invested enough money in building homes that people can actually afford. Given this crisis, why isn't the Prime Minister responding to the seriousness of this crisis with the response necessary to help people find a home that they can actually afford?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as outlined in the speech from the throne, housing is a major priority for this government, and we will deliver. With programs like the Housing Accelerator Fund, which will help municipalities build more and better faster. Whether it's building more units per year or increasing affordable housing, we will work with partners to get real results for Canadian families, including with things like helping families buy their first home sooner with a more flexible first-time homebuyers incentive, a new rent-to-own program, and by reducing the closing costs for first-time buyers.
The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
On est dans une crise du logement. C'est vraiment impossible de trouver un logement abordable. Et ce gouvernement ne sait pas c'est quoi abordable. Il pense que 2 225 $ par mois pour le loyer à Montréal, c'est abordable. C'est fou. Pourquoi ce Premier ministre ne répond pas à la crise du logement avec l'urgence nécessaire pour aider les gens?
Le très honorable Premier ministre.
Monsieur le Président, nous passons justement aux actes. Comme on l'a dit dans le discours du trône, le logement est une priorité importante pour notre gouvernement qui va produire des résultats. Par le biais des programmes comme le Fonds d'accélération du logement qui aidera les municipalités à construire davantage, mieux et plus rapidement, que ce soit en construisant plus de logements par année ou en augmentant le nombre de logements abordables. Nous allons travailler avec nos partenaires afin d'obtenir de vrais résultats pour les familles canadiennes, en également aidant les familles à acheter leur première maison plus tôt à l'aide d'un incitatif à l'achat d'une première propriété assoupli et d'un nouveau programme de location-achat et en réduisant les frais de clôture pour les nouveaux acheteurs.
The Honourable Member for West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country.
Mr. Speaker, my province has been devastated by natural disasters over this past year. In between wildfires, landslides, and flooding, my constituents and countless British Columbians are having their property and their lives threatened or even lost. With the ever-worsening reality of climate change, we know that these weather events are going to become more frequent and severe. Can the Prime Minister please tell this House and update this House on his critical work to address this issue?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
I thank the member from West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country for this important question, and my thoughts, as they do from everyone in this House, remain with the people of British Columbia. As a result of the recent floods, we approved a request for federal assistance, and over 500 members of the Canadian Armed Forces are on the ground and will remain there as long as needed with reinforcements at the ready. We will do more to mitigate the damage from these natural disasters and move forward on a low-cost national flood insurance program. And we will be there with the people of British Columbia every step of the way as they clean up, as they recover, and as we all rebuild together.
L'honorable député de Richmond-Arthabasca.
Monsieur le Président, hier, nous avons eu droit encore à de belles paroles, mais aucune action concrète pour contrer l'inflation qui fait en sorte que les Canadiens et Québécois voient les coûts de leur panier d'épicerie, de l'essence et du logement exploser. Est-ce que le Premier ministre qui a déjà affirmé que le budget s'équilibrait tout seul, c'est vrai, le Premier ministre a déjà dit ça, peut dire aux Canadiens quand il compte proposer des mesures concrètes qui permettraient de s'attaquer à cette hausse du coût de la vie qui touche tous les citoyens?
Très honorable Premier ministre.
Évidemment, Monsieur le Président, pour les gens qui ont écouté le discours du trône, ils verraient bien que notre discours était axé sur les solutions qu'on met de l'avant pour les familles qui font face à ces défis, particulièrement en matière de logement, particulièrement en matière de places en garderie abordables. Ces deux exemples qui impactent directement les coûts de la vie, deux exemples où, malheureusement, les conservateurs n'avaient et n'ont aucun plan pour aider les Canadiens, mais heureusement, le gouvernement sera là en partenariat avec les provinces pour aider les familles à travers le pays.
Le député de Richmond-Arthabasca.
Monsieur le Président, la réalité, c'est que les politiques, les priorités du Premier ministre ne font rien pour les Canadiens qui sont préoccupés par la crise du coût de la vie, qui empêche les familles d'accéder à la propriété, qui augmente les prix des produits essentiels, qui paralyse les entreprises en raison des limites de la chaîne d'approvisionnement et de la pénurie de main-d'œuvre que l'on vit tous. Alors, je répète ma question au Premier ministre qui est extrêmement simple. Quand compte-t-il proposer des mesures concrètes qui permettraient de s'attaquer à la hausse du coût de la vie de tous les Canadiens et Canadiennes?
Très honorable Premier ministre.
C'est ce que nous avons proposé hier avec plusieurs mesures qui allaient créer la croissance économique, qui allaient assurer l'aide aux familles, qui allaient nous assurer aussi d'en finir avec cette pandémie une bonne fois pour toutes. Je dois remarquer que dans toutes les questions que les conservateurs nous ont posées aujourd'hui, il n'y en avait aucune sur d'en finir avec cette pandémie. Mais nous savons que la meilleure approche pour rebondir l'économie, c'est de s'assurer qu'on en finisse pour de bon avec cette pandémie. Malheureusement, ce n'est pas tous les conservateurs qui sont vaccinés, mais plus que 95% des Canadiens le sont, ce qui est une bonne chose, et on va continuer de travailler là-dessus.
Honorable député de Richmond-Arthabasca.
Monsieur le Président, je me demande si le Premier ministre a lu le discours du trône avant qu'il ait été élu par le gouverneur général, parce que dans l'ensemble du texte, une seule fois le mot inflation a été nommé. Alors, au lieu de présenter un plan de relance économique pour les familles, les aînés et les PME, que propose le Premier ministre? C'est plus de déficit qui entraîneront une hausse du coût des taxes et des impôts et qui vont faire augmenter le coût de la vie des Canadiens et des Canadiennes. Alors, au lieu de se concentrer sur les priorités de la population, c'est exactement le contraire que fait le Premier ministre. Alors, je répète ma question. Quand aurons-nous des actions concrètes qui vont s'attaquer à l'augmentation du coût de la vie de tous les Canadiens et Canadiennes?
Très honorable Premier ministre.
Président, c'est le député en face qui n'a pas lu le discours du trône, parce que nous étions axés sur les solutions dans ce discours. Les Canadiens nous ont donné des indications claires pour mettre la COVID-19 derrière nous et trouver des vraies solutions pour bâtir un meilleur avenir pour les Canadiens. Donc hier, on a exposé notre plan qui terminera notre lutte contre la COVID-19, qui prendra des mesures vigoureuses contre les changements climatiques, qui rendra la vie plus abordable, qui nous fera avancer ensemble sur la voie de la réconciliation, aidera les Canadiens à devenir propriétaires et créer des emplois tout en faisant croître la classe moyenne en luttant contre la pénurie de main-d'œuvre. C'est ce que nous proposons comme solution aux Canadiens, Monsieur le Président.
Honorable député de Richmond-Arthabasca.
Monsieur le Président, voici ce que l'on entend tous dans nos bureaux de circonscription. Problème de main-d'œuvre en agriculture, dans le commerce de détail, dans les entreprises manufacturières, problème avec Immigration Canada pour traiter les demandes des travailleurs étrangers qui veulent venir nous aider ici. Explosion du coût de la vie, de l'épicerie, de l'essence, du logement. Et quelles actions concrètes ont été proposées hier par le gouvernement pour s'attaquer à ces problèmes? Aucune. Une seule mention sur l'inflation. Les gens en ont assez des belles paroles du Premier ministre. Ils veulent des actions.
Le très honorable Premier ministre.
Encore une fois, Monsieur le Président, les conservateurs ne semblent pas comprendre que l'inflation, c'est un problème, pas une solution. Nous, on a axé notre discours du trône et notre plan sur les solutions pour les Canadiens. Des solutions comme de terminer la lutte contre la COVID-19, de prendre des mesures rigoureuses contre les changements climatiques, de rendre la vie plus abordable, d'avancer ensemble sur la voie de la réconciliation, d'aider les Canadiens à devenir propriétaires et créer des emplois et lutter contre la pénurie de main-d'œuvre en même temps. C'est ce que nous proposons. C'est les solutions que les Canadiens veulent et pour lesquelles ils ont voté il y a quelques mois. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
L'honorable député de Belleuil-Chambly.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je salue l'épiphanie du Premier ministre. Il reconnaît l'existence de juridictions pour les provinces et le Québec. Alléluia! Si les ressources naturelles sont une juridiction de l'Alberta dans le cas du pétrole, il n'est pas obligé de leur donner de l'argent pour extraire le pétrole. Ni directement, ni indirectement, ni en faisant semblant que c'est pour baisser les émissions de gaz à effet de serre qui auront pour effet d'augmenter la production. Est-ce que changer ça n'est pas un plan?
Le très honorable Premier ministre.
Monsieur le Président, nous savons que les changements climatiques représentent une vraie menace, non seulement pour les générations futures dans leur qualité de vie, mais aussi dans leurs emplois et leurs carrières. C'est pour ça que nous reconnaissons qu'il faut absolument lutter contre les changements climatiques, mettre une limite sur les émissions du secteur gazier et pétrolier et réduire ces émissions, tout en investissant pour créer des bons emplois dans l'avenir. Nous allons être là comme gouvernement fédéral pour être partenaire non seulement avec les provinces, mais avec tous les Canadiens pour créer ces opportunités de bonne carrière et de bonne qualité de vie dans l'avenir.
Avant de continuer avec l'honorable député de Belleuil-Chambly, je veux rappeler aux députés que quand on est à notre place, si on n'a pas 6 pieds entre nous puis la prochaine personne, je vous rappelle de garder vos masques juste pour qu'on soit à l'aise et on se sent sain et saut. Je sais que des fois on oublie. OK. C'est beau.
Okay. L'honorable député de Belleuil-Chambly.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Donc, nous avons établi que le Premier ministre vient de découvrir la notion de juridiction provinciale ou québécoise. Et nous avons aussi établi qu'il a la capacité de donner de l'argent dans des juridictions provinciales ou québécoises. C'est fort intéressant. Est-ce que le Premier ministre pourrait avoir l'épiphanie complète et faire exactement la même affaire pour les transferts en santé?
Le très honorable Premier ministre.
Tout d'abord, Monsieur le Président, je suis content qu'enfin le Bloc québécois commence à comprendre comment ça fonctionne, la Fédération canadienne. Il était temps. Alors oui, nous sommes là pour s'assurer de partenariat avec les provinces et oui, pour investir en partenariat avec les provinces dans bien des domaines pour s'assurer que les Canadiens d'un bout à l'autre de ce grand pays qui s'appelle le Canada puissent s'épanouir pleinement. Nous sommes là comme gouvernement fédéral pour être là comme on était pendant la pandémie, comme on est là pour les gens en Colombie-Britannique, mais aussi comme on est là pour des programmes pour accroître notre économie, pour aider les entreprises et pour garder nos Canadiens en santé.
The honourable member for Calgary, Nose Hill.
Mr. Speaker, earlier in question period, the Prime Minister used the phrase, even in places like Alberta, in a derogatory way that is frankly unbecoming of the Prime Minister of this country. For shame. We know what the Prime Minister thinks of workers in Western Canada, but at a time when fuel costs are rising out of control, the Prime Minister needs to stop his attack on the workers in Western Canada who provide Canada with a low-carbon, ethical and secure source of energy while merrily cheering as tankers of Saudi oil make their way down the St. Lawrence. Does the Prime Minister even know how much fuel has increased in cost since he last took questions in this place?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, allow me to say that over the past many months, we have been working closely with Albertans, whether it's family representatives or nonprofit organizations, who've been pushing their elected representatives to move forward on the $10 a day childcare that indeed places like Manitoba and Saskatchewan had even last summer. And it was with great pleasure that we saw the Conservative government of Alberta move forward and sign a historic deal on $10 a day childcare. The challenge, Mr. Speaker, is there is not one federal Conservative representative from Alberta who supports $10 a day childcare, and that is a shame for all Albertans.
The honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill.
The number of daycare spaces created by this government, this Liberal government in Alberta, 0. The number of jobs lost in my province under this Prime Minister, hundreds of thousands. He thinks that sending tax dollars to fancy think tanks, increasing debt, which increases inflation, is going to somehow lower the cost of basic building goods like lumber, which is out of control, and he has no plan to address this. Does the Prime Minister even know how much a 2x4 costs these days?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it's interesting to hear a Conservative member criticize our plan on housing that involved initiatives like working with the municipalities to the tune of $4 billion to invest in more housing, to give more flexible first-time homebuyers incentives, when the Conservative plan that member ran on in Calgary Nose Hill was to give tax breaks to wealthy landlords to sell their buildings easier. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives don't understand the challenges faced by Canadians in the area of housing, because if they did, they'd be proposing a real plan the way we are.
The honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Price of everything has increased under this Prime Minister's watch, including housing. Housing is more unaffordable under this Prime Minister. He does not have the courage to put together a plan. He doesn't have the courage to stand up for Canadian workers as he offshores our job. He doesn't have the courage to stand here and come up with smart economic policies that are going to drive down the cost of goods, get our economy back to work. He does not have the courage to put together a vision. So, Mr. Speaker, it begs the question, how much are Canadians paying for chicken these days?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as far as a rhetorical device goes, accusing an honourable member of cowardice is hardly the kind of tone that I think Canadians want to see in this more constructive House. Canadians returned us with a very clear mandate, all of us, to end this pandemic once and for all, which happens through vaccinations, guys, but also to move forward on investing in things like $10 a day childcare.
The tone or the sound level is going up that I can barely hear the Prime Minister. I'm going to ask the Prime Minister to start over from the beginning, please.
I think, Mr. Speaker, when Canadians sent this House, newly reconstituted House, back to work to end the pandemic, to invest in things like $10 a day childcare, invest in a stronger future in fighting climate change and creating good jobs, they didn't want to hear silly schoolyard insults from any members towards the government. And that, Mr. Speaker, is why we're going to continue to stay focused on Canadians, even as Conservatives continue to try and fling mud. Canadians need a House that's going to work together. That's exactly what we're going to do.
L'honorable député de Sherbrooke.
Monsieur le Président, hier, la gouverneure générale a lu le discours du trône, discours qui décrit les objectifs du gouvernement et les moyens concrets pour les rencontrer. Une partie importante de ce discours porte sur l'action climatique, sur l'urgence d'agir et sur ce que nous ferons pour rebâtir notre économie et être un chef de file dans la lutte au changement climatique. Le Premier ministre peut-il dire aux gens de ma circonscription de Sherbrooke et aux Canadiens comment il compte atteindre ces objectifs
to achieve these important objectives.
Le très honorable Premier ministre.
Monsieur
le Président, j'aimerais remercier la députée de Sherbrooke pour son dévouement à la lutte contre la crise climatique. Pour créer des emplois et faire croître la classe moyenne, nous devons prendre des mesures ambitieuses en matière de climat. C'est pourquoi nous allons de l'avant avec des mesures comme le plafonnement et la réduction des émissions du secteur pétrolier et l'augmentation du prix de la pollution. Nous continuerons à investir dans nos travailleurs et dans notre industrie pour aider à entrer dans l'économie du futur tout en s'assurant que personne ne soit laissé pour compte.
The honourable member for Foothills.
How many times was agriculture mentioned in the throne speech? Not once. So it shouldn't come as any surprise that the Prime Minister's first decision on agriculture was to end the export of our potatoes for Prince Edward Island to the United States. Not consultation with the Premier, no consultation with the farm families who are going to be devastated by this decision. Islanders are already having a tough time making ends meet because of Liberal inflation, and yet this Prime Minister is intent to destroy one of their most important industries. This decision was based on politics, not based on science. Will this Prime Minister reverse this crippling, self-imposed ban of our potato exports?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, yet again proof that the Conservatives didn't even bother to read the throne speech. We addressed directly that political decision Mr. Harper made a number of years ago to cancel the PFRA by restoring a Canadian water agency that would support prairie farmers and indeed people right across the country. In the matter of potatoes, we are obviously extremely concerned. I brought it up directly with the President last week when I was in Washington because we know...
I'm just going to ask the Prime Minister to stop just for a moment. Okay, go ahead. Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, in regards to the serious situation facing Islanders, we have been working closely with Islanders and indeed with the Americans to make sure that the Americans understand that there is no scientific basis for the ban of table potatoes. We are going to continue to stand up for Prince Edward Islanders, look for a solution on this based on science.
The Honourable Member for Foothills.
Obviously, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has no idea what I was talking about, but maybe he should ask his members of Parliament from Prince Edward Island who haven't said a single word about this decision. With the stroke of a pen, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has devastated Prince Edward Island's potato industry. This is crippling for those farm families, like the Roses in Souris, like the Ellis family in O'Leary. Will these members of Parliament from Prince Edward Island, will they stand up and tell the Prime Minister to reverse the self-imposed ban on our potato exports to the United States? Yes or no?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, following the discovery of potato wart on seed potatoes in Prince Edward Island, the Americans threatened to cut off all potato exports from Prince Edward Island to the United States. We made the decision to move forward with a voluntary suspension to prevent the Americans from bringing in something that would have been much more difficult to reverse, while we work with the Americans and other partners to ensure that they understand there is no scientific basis for the banning of table potatoes from Prince Edward Island, or table potatoes from Prince Edward Island towards the United States or anywhere else.
I just want to remind the honourable members that the masks aren't muffling that much of the sound. The honourable member for Barrie-Innisfil.
During the election, the member from Calgary Skyview was caught on a doorbell camera and has been accused of not just removing campaign literature from Conservative candidate Jag Sahota, but replacing it with his own piece that provided wrong information about a polling location. The member is facing a $5,000 fine and up to 6 months in jail during an investigation that is continuing from the Commissioner of Canada Elections. Even with the low bar on ethics and conduct set by the Liberals and indeed the Prime Minister over the last 6 years, does the Prime Minister think that this type of action from a member of his caucus is acceptable?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, the member has apologized and is fully cooperating with Elections Canada as it goes through its processes.
The Honourable Member for Fredericton.
Mr. Speaker, our government has reached 9 childcare agreements across all provinces and territories. I
am acutely aware that access to childcare will make a major difference for families in my riding and across Canada. Not only does it give our children the best possible start in life, it allows parents, especially mothers, to maintain their professional careers, and it creates good, well-paying jobs for educators. Can the Prime Minister update this House on the agreement reached, the ones we're still waiting for, and how they will change the lives of Canadians?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank our outstanding member for Fredericton for this important question. This month, Alberta joined our Canada-wide early learning and childcare system, making it the 9th jurisdiction to offer $10 a day childcare spaces for families. That means that 60% of all children across Canada under the age of 6 will have access to early learning and childcare for $10 a day in 5 years or less. Together, we will finish the job and deliver $10 a day childcare for all Canadian families, including families in New Brunswick. Yes.
The honourable member for Burnaby South.
Right now, this government is cutting the help that vulnerable seniors and families need. By cutting GIS and cutting the child benefit, vulnerable seniors and families are struggling to put food on the table. They're struggling to keep their homes because they cannot afford the rent. The Prime Minister can fix this today. Yes. Will the Prime Minister today commit to ending the clawbacks of GIS and ending the clawbacks of the child benefit and stop hurting vulnerable seniors and families?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
I want to begin by thanking the Leader of the NDP for continuing to stand up for Canadians as we endeavour to do on this side of the House, and I look forward to working with him on issues such as this, because from the beginning our government's priority has been to support the most vulnerable, which is why we worked hard to strengthen income security for seniors, including by a boost to the GIS. It's also why we stopped the Conservatives' practice of sending child benefit checks to millionaires to send more to families who needed it with the CCB. We put in place the CERB to help people at the height of the pandemic. We know it's having an impact on some of our most vulnerable now. Ministers are actively working on this issue to come to the right solution to support vulnerable Canadians, because we will always be there for them.
And I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. C'est tout pour aujourd'hui. For those who are leaving, I'll give you a bit of time to sneak out so that we can continue.